Well, joining me today is the French football writer and broadcaster Tom Williams, plus Pierre-Etienne Minonzio from the French publication L'Equipe. Gents, thanks very much for being on the show. Now, Tom, we know that this wasn't the start that France would have wanted. Obviously, the draw against Poland on Tuesday meant that they finished second in the group. What, in general, has been the response in France to how they've performed so far?
Well, I mean, we've been here before with Didier Deschamps' France in that, very often their football isn't particularly inspiring, but that hasn't stopped them from having very successful tournaments in the past. I mean, most notably 2018 World Cup, where, nothing that they produced in the group phase suggested that they were about to go on and win the tournament, and lo and behold, they did. 2022 World Cup group phase was much more successful, much more comfortable. Then in the knockout rounds, football got a little bit stodgy again, but they end up getting to the final and, were millimetres away from retaining the trophy. So French football fans are used to France not playing particularly exciting football under Deschamps, but still getting the job done. I think there is more concern though this time around because the failure to win the group has cast France into the more difficult half of the draw. Ordinarily, despite the football being underwhelming, France generally managed to win the group. That obviously hasn't been the case this time around. Just watching that game against Poland, I mean, France's football was so uninspiring. This is the third group game as well. Ordinarily by this time, I mean, obviously, England have got issues of their own, but for most of the major countries, by the third group game, the coach has got an idea of where he's trying to take things, and France were extremely lethargic against Poland, produced very little. On the flip side of that, they are still creating chances and just not taking them. So I think there's a desire to keep the faith with Deschamps, because this is the Deschamps recipe and it has worked plenty of times in the past. But it's impossible to ignore the evidence of how poor the football has been. There have also been sort of rumblings about a bit of discontent in the camp, players unhappy with the amount of playing time they've had, not all that happy with the way that the starting lineup is being announced, not particularly enthused by the kind of training sessions that Deschamps and his staff are putting on. And we know that there is always that potential with the France national team for things to suddenly explode. So yeah, there's a desire to keep the faith with Deschamps, but there is a genuine note of concern as well, I think.
We'll pick at a couple of those threads a little bit later on, I think, especially the discontent. We always like to just to work out exactly maybe who are the ringleaders within camps. Pierre-Etienne, when I think of L'Equipe, I think of ratings. What has France's rating so far been for you, or overall? What have you been giving them?
Yeah, the rating as usual and are not that good for the French team, but for L'Equipe it's quite a difficult situation now, because usually we could have done like the English press is doing now, to be very criticism, because when you look at the content of the game, as Tom said, it's quite awful. But as Tom said as well, there is so much example in the past when Deschamps managed to put the right team for the knockout stage. I mean, he's a world master of knockout stage, Deschamps. So if you begin to criticize him, and in the end of the day, once again, he managed to go through, we are in a difficult situation in L'Equipe, to be honest. So we criticize, but we keep in mind that he's totally able to do something with his team. And we also remember, as Tom said, that, in the past, people have forgotten that, but there have been awful games in group stage. For example, France, Denmark, World Cup 2018. It's the worst game I've ever seen of France. Or France-Tunisia 2022 World Cup. It was a defeat. Tunisia won. So there is a lot of example of poor group phase and very good knockout game. So we still keep hoping, but things doesn't look that good.
So with the French media, who are obviously holding Didier Deschamps to account, do they almost hold off at the moment? But then if it's if it's another lackluster performance against Belgium, obviously that may well, cost them a place in the tournament. But if they only sneak past Belgium, will the questions seriously start to be asked about him or not?
Not because he has a contract until the next World Cup. So until they lost 4-0 against Belgium, it won't change. When they lost against Switzerland in 2021, it doesn't change anything for him because he has so much account. He has proved so many things that he's quite untouchable. Until the next World Cup. So what we do in a few French media, within articles, you can see a lot of small criticism. Exactly what Tom said. Some players are quite unhappy with the way the team is announced. Some players say that the training are not that good. So if you read carefully L'Équipe, you can see that there's a of growing contestation, but we don't make a lot of it because we don't know if we still think that Deschamps is still able to control the situation.
Tom, who are the bad earths in the squad at the moment?
Well, I mean, we've not yet got to the stage of the bad eggs being, sort of hung out to dry. But yeah, there's a suggestion that players who haven't had game time are, sort of letting it be known that they're not best pleased about things. And you look at some of the high-profile players who've kind of come in and out of the starting 11. Antoine Griezmann was the most notable one against Poland. I mean, he has been one of the key players for France throughout the Deschamps era. And it was the first time that he hadn't started a game at a major tournament with something riding on it since 2016. So that was something that that raised eyebrows, and Deschamps was quite combative in his post-match press conference, sort of playing it down. Antoine is a player like any other. He has to accept that sometimes he's going to be rested, etc., etc. So we don't yet have an idea. I mean, there isn't a suggestion that there's a rift, or that people are in open revolt against the coach. But as Pierre-Etienne said, there are these little indications, and I was going to sort of draw a historical parallel as well. One of the reasons why the French media have learnt to proceed with caution is the example of the 1998 World Cup, where Aimé Jacquet was monstered by the French media, by some of Pierre-Etienne's predecessors at L'Équipe, because France's football was awful, like pre-tournament. The displays in the friendlies leading up to 1998 were terrible, and I think L'Équipe wrote that, trying to win the World Cup with this team would be like trying to climb Everest in slippers. And, a few weeks later, France were world champions. And I think that had that was such a kind of shock to the system for French football journalists, that this caution is now really kind of inbuilt, because 1998, everything seemed to be heading in the wrong direction, and suddenly it ended up in, heading in the right direction. So that might explain a bit of the reluctance to kind of stick the boot in as well. Yeah,
just to I totally agree. Just to give you an idea, just after the final restart of the final 1998, one of the first things Aimé Jacquet just said, so he's world champion, he said, "Je n'oublierai jamais. I will never forget." So he doesn't want to enjoy at this very time. He didn't want to enjoy. He just want to say to French newspaper, especially L'Équipe, "I will never forget what you said about me." And he never spoke to L'Équipe since then. So to give you an idea, that's why we are a bit careful now.
Well, there you go. I suppose that's a lesson to have been learnt. Pierre-Etienne, from your point of view, we look at that France side. We see, in particular, in terms of the attacking threat that there is, why are they not scoring goals? What is the answer, and how big a factor in this has been Kylian Mbappe and the nose issue and the mask and things like that? Because it's a genuine distraction, and to ensure that you're a fully functioning side, you want your main man to be content, which he's clearly not been.
Yeah. I thought in the beginning of the question you were talking about England, but you're talking about France, right?
Yes, we've been there. Let's leave England. Well, it's
Yeah,
nice
right,
talking
sorry.
about another team. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
sorry, because I was you were talking about the discrepancy between potential and reality, so I was like, okay.
Yeah.
No, to be serious, yes. So yes, there is three problems. One, the performance of Mbappe, our main player. So even before he has his nose broken, he was not totally fit. So it's a problem because all the team is thinking around him. The other problem is maybe that all the other forward players are not that good actually. For example, Giroud gives the impression to be a bit old. It's hard to say, but it looks like his last dance. And every time he comes during game, he doesn't happen. Nothing happens. So I hope he will prove the contrary. But for now, it gives the impression it's quite the end. And you have player like Thuram or Colomwani that for me that didn't enough prove at international level. And then you have Dembele. We all know him, so talented, so gifted, but so poor sometimes in his last touch. And the third problem, I would say, it's a tactical problem that Deschamps is still looking for his right system. As Tom said, usually there is at the second or the third game, suddenly it click. Deschamps understands what he wants to do and he stick with it. And no, it doesn't. It doesn't stop changing. And to give you an idea, against Netherlands, Rabiot was almost a winger. He has a very defensive profile. So he's still looking for. He's very cautious. He doesn't have the right for his forward player are not good. So all of this explains the current situation.
Our football tactics writer Michael Cox has called Deschamps' side boring. Tom, is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, it is fair. I mean, you have to watch that game against Poland, and again, and not to be constantly making comparisons with England, but there is a similar degree of frustration around the France team, and this goes right back to the start of the Deschamps era. That the deal has been with Deschamps. The football's not going to be great to watch, but it's going to be successful. And at the moment, it's not great to watch, and we don't yet know whether or not it's going to be successful. And there is a huge amount of talent in that France squad, but it currently feels some way off what should be the full sum of its parts. I mean, you look at the team that Deschamps put out for that final group game against Poland, very workmanlike midfield, with no sort of creativity at all, really. Tchouaméni, Kante and Adrien Rabiot. And then front three, an all PSG front three of Dembele, Mbappe and Barcola. And the lack of creativity in midfield meant that France were pretty much entirely dependent on one of the three forward players producing a moment of magic out of nowhere. And we saw some flashes from Barcola, notably, who made a very strong impression on what was his first international start for France. Mbappe got himself into some good positions without managing to score aside from his penalty. Dembele had a sort of classic Dembele game where he looks like he's about to do something every time he gets the ball, and then it never really kind of transpires to much, although he did win the penalty from which Mbappe gave France the lead. But yeah, for the talent at Deschamps' disposal, France are an underwhelming watch. They have been for a long time. And in previous tournaments, that hasn't prevented them from going on and enjoying success. That the worry is that this time around, those problems and that sort of lack of evolution, that lack of a plan coming together might end up, costing France their place at the tournament. And it does feel like we are kind of sliding towards Deschamps falling back on the same kind of tactical setup that he used at the 2018 World Cup, the kind of the asymmetric 4-2-3-1 with a kind of hard-working, defensive-minded midfielder on the left. 2018, it was Blaise Matuidi. This time around, it's Adrien Rabiot. N'Golo Kante is still there, brought back from the wilderness. He's got a kind of Paul Pogba style player alongside him in Aurélien Tchouaméni. You've got Mbappe. You're probably going to have Griezmann back in the team, and then it's all about how you fit that puzzle together. And the pieces are all there, but for the time being, the jigsaw seems some way away from completion.
But Pierre-Etienne, the faith is there that Didier Deschamps, because of his track record, has the ability to get it right. That's obviously the fear with some other teams, none mentioned, that haven't had any success for a long time, that people think, well, he's not got it right before, so we don't know if he's going to get it right now. With Deschamps, he's got that track record. So you must have faith deep inside your heart, do you not?
Yeah, as like you said, we believe, but there is doubt these times because, as we said, there is a lot of worrying sign, and that was not there in the previous tournament, especially the fact that some player apparently look very unhappy, which is not good. Usually it's very good to keep everything under control, even the player who doesn't play that much. And we'll see. So Deschamps, is very different from the other national coach. There is a lot of aspects in which he does things very differently. For example, he has a very small crew around him. If you compare to Southgate had a lot of people for the performance, a lot of assistants. Deschamps, it's a very small crew. To give you an idea, for example, he considers that the penalty shot out, it's not important to prepare them because it's kind of lottery. So there is a lot of aspect of Deschamps lives in his own world. And at the moment, we are like, but maybe he's wrong in a lot of aspects, but we'll see. So we trust him, but this time it looks a bit different.
So let's look at one particular positive, which I've really loved seeing. And Tom, you mentioned it a little bit earlier on. The re-emergence of N'Golo Kante. He's just great to watch, and I mean, he must just be a delight to play with.
It's one of the feel-good stories of the tournament, and certainly for France, it's been one of the few, kind of bright spots since the tournament began. N'Golo Kante, who hadn't played for France for a couple of years, who'd been in Saudi Arabia, he was the one surprise in the squad list that Deschamps announced. I don't think anyone had seen it coming. He wasn't really being talked about as a potential candidate. But he was brought back in because he'd got minutes under his belt last season. Obviously, we all remember his last season at Chelsea. Very difficult from a fitness perspective, lots of injury problems, very few appearances. And he kind of, sadly looked like he was on his way out at the highest level. But he's got those minutes under his belt now. And I think because he's a player who was always sort of relied predominantly on his kind of physical capacities, that's been the only question mark really over Kante. We know what a fabulous footballer he is. It's just, is he fit enough to do the kind of job that that his team needs him to do? You've seen the reaction within the France squad in the build up to the tournament. We heard a lot from players within the squad talking about Kante, and those who were there before, those who played with him, in 2016, in 2018, were kind of delighted to have rediscovered the Kante from before. Every bit as tireless, as hardworking, the same sort of humble, unassuming guy off the pitch. And I think there was a real delight that he has, returned to the fold, having lost none of his qualities as a footballer. But also, we've been hearing from players who'd never played with Kante before, who could not believe how good he is, how much ground he covers, how unfair it seems to be in training when he's on the opposition team to you and you have to put up with this guy who just never stops, snapping at ankles and making interceptions, etc. That is one thing, that is one gamble that Deschamps has attempted that has come off. And I think for all of us, particularly those of us in the UK who remember his role in Leicester's title win in 2016 and winning the title again at Chelsea, it's such a fantastic footballer, and he looked to be kind of drifting into obscurity. So to have him back now, shining for France at a major tournament again is fantastic. This
is the hope from England supporters as well with England, that now all the bigger teams are there, although England won't be playing them until the latter stages of the tournament, obviously. But now the bigger teams are there for France, that they will up their levels and they will almost enjoy going toe-to-toe with bigger players and bigger teams.
Yeah, I mean, it could well work in France's favour. The fact that they're playing, a team who, on paper at least, should, cause them problems. That sort of focuses the mind in a way that playing against one of the lesser lights perhaps doesn't. It helps as well that France have this historic rivalry with Belgium. That the World Cup semi-final in 2018 is still spoken about. France with this classic sort of Deschamps rope-a-dope victory, 1-0, Samuel Umtiti header from a corner, and the Belgian players fuming after the game. Thibaut Courtois, this is not football. Eden Hazard, I'd rather lose with this Belgium than win with that France team. And so that there is a bit of a needle there. And it means that instantly, the kind of the less than stellar impression that was left by France's group stage performance is being replaced by a sense of anticipation. This is a test. Belgium are not the Belgium that they were 4, 6, 8 years ago, perhaps, but they still have players who can hurt you. There is that rivalry. There is a kind of, degree of antipathy, perhaps, but between the players on both sides. Those memories of 2018 and also France beating Belgium in the Nations League in 2021. So I think that will help France to just draw a line beneath what has happened so far and move on to the next phase of the tournament. And Deschamps said himself after that Poland game, and it was a classic sort of Deschamps expression, but he said, a new tournament begins now. For him, it's, there isn't a great deal of continuity between group phase and knockout football. He is someone who, he's a coach who thrives on the dangers of knockout football. So I'm not sure we're necessarily going to see France producing spectacular football. If anything, I think playing against a team as dangerous as Belgium can be will probably only encourage Deschamps to fall back on his usual sort of defence first, very cautious approach. But I think the fact that it is a knockout game, that it's against a local rival, that everyone will have to be on high alert, you would think at least that should sort of focus minds and we will start to, if France are going to go deep into this tournament, we need to rediscover the France of recent tournament successes in this game against Belgium.
Pierre-Etienne, just to explain that rivalry.
Yeah, I think maybe you can in some way compare it to England and Scotland. It's a long story. First game against the two team, it was 1904. So it's a story of 120 years. It's the opponent France have played the most often against. So it's a very long story. As Tom said, the semi-final. It was very hard for Belgium this game, semi-final of 2018, because they really think that it was their moment to do something in the World Cup, and it was very hard to accept to lose against a defensive team. So it's a long story with we beat them again in a semi-final of League of Nations. Incredible game when we were I think there was 2-0 maybe for Belgium, and finally we won. So there is a lot of painful story for them. So to be honest, we are a bit confident for this game, maybe overconfident, but we are confident. But yeah, as you said as well, what follow is not easy, because potentially it could be Portugal, then it will be potentially Spain or Germany, and then the final against Austria, not England. No, we will see. Now the draw is very, very difficult. So we have some hope for England for the Belgium game. Sorry, but what come next will be very difficult.
So a big subplot to this tournament for France has been a number of their players talking out ahead of the French elections, which start in 2 rounds on Sunday. Obviously, not only clashing with this tournament, but obviously the upcoming Olympics in Paris as well. Kylian Mbappe has been very pointed in some of his comments, a plea to the public to recognise that the extremes are knocking on the doors of power, he said. Other players have spoken out as well. From your point of view, Pierre-Etienne, what has the reaction in France been of Mbappe talking directly about political matters? Is it welcomed by some?
So I think it's good. It's very good that the French player says something about this situation. Obviously, it's a complicated matter. I do remember I was covering England in 2016, just before the Brexit. It was during the European Championship in France. And I was very surprised that the player didn't say anything almost about it. So obviously, I realized that it was a divided topic. I respect that. But at least you can say that you have to vote and you have to think about what means your presence in Europe, something like that. And so I know it's complicated. And I know it's not exactly Brexit and the current situation are not the same. But in some ways, it is the same because if you make the wrong decision, according to me, the consequences are huge. At least you have to care. You have to care about what's happening. So I think that was great what they said. But the problem is the fact that they are not on the same page, all on the same page on this, because you have Thuram. So Thuram is the son of Lilian Thuram, very incredibly political, engaged footballer. His son is a bit like that. And he said a very interesting thing. And he said, I don't want far right in my country, which you can hear that. But the problem is that Mbappe didn't say exactly the same thing. He said, I don't want extreme on my country. That takes the control of my country. That means that he doesn't want the Rassemblement National, far-right party. Sorry, it's a bit technical, but it's important. And he doesn't want as well the union between Parti Socialiste, the socialist, and LFI, which is a far-right party,
far left.
Far left, far left. And there's kind of coalition between them. And a lot of people didn't understand why he says that because this is what Macron says. The French president said, I'm sorry, it's a bit technical, but it's very important to understand it because the difference is important. Macron said, you don't vote for the far right, but you don't vote for the left as well because it's too extreme political proposition. But a lot of people, France, consider that you cannot compare them because what happened on the left side of politics, it's a coalition and with a lot of socialists and ecological party as well, who are not extreme. So I don't know if it's clear. So a lot of people were disappointed that Mbappe, in some ways, put on the same line these two political propositions. I don't know if it's clear. So to be clear, a lot of people were happy on the fact that they say things. And in the end of the day, the most important thing they say is you have to vote, you have to think, you have to understand what is happening is potentially very, very, very important. But a lot of people were a bit disappointed with the position of Mbappe, which is the same as Macron, and we know that they are sometimes in contact. So yeah, this thing. It's good that they say something, but a lot of people think that maybe Mbappe didn't go enough in what he said.
What's your take on it, Tom?
I mean, it's fascinating and it's unprecedented. I mean, it is very unusual for French footballers to speak out about politics. Historically, the first example, and I think the most comparable example that comes to mind is 2002, and when Jean-Marie Le Pen, who was the founder of Front National, which has since become Rassemblement National, reached the second round of the presidential elections in a manner that really shocked France as a country. And on that occasion, some footballers, notably Zinedine Zidane, spoke out and said, you can't allow this to happen. This is a moment of grave danger for our country. You cannot allow Jean-Marie Le Pen to come to power. And he didn't win the election, and the threat was kind of pushed off. But that's the last time I think a French footballer with a comparable profile has made an intervention like this, and it reflects the sense of urgency in France. There's the sense of panic at the thought that a far right party might be about to take control of the French Parliament. And what's particularly unusual as well is that this is happening during a major tournament. Players have occasionally made political statements in the past. I mean, as Pierre-Etienne said, Marcus Thuram is someone who has been politically engaged from, a very young age. He was the first high-profile footballer to take the knee after the murder of George Floyd at the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement. So he's someone who's always been engaged. So it wasn't all that surprising to hear him speak out. It was much more surprising to hear Mbappe speak out. And as Pierre-Etienne said, it's, he chose his words much more carefully. And I think that's because Mbappe is conscious of his significance within France, his status as one of the most famous French sports people in the world, one of the most famous French people in the world, full stop. So I think that probably explains why he didn't go quite as far as Thuram did, even though he said he agreed with what Thuram had said. He talked about, diversity and tolerance. He just couldn't bring himself to actually pronounce the words Rassemblement National. I've spoken to sort of political analysts about this, and their feeling is that it's unlikely to sway people in a particularly significant way because people from Mbappe's background, people from Thuram's background, from ethnic minority backgrounds living in the banlieue, in the urban suburbs of France's major cities, they're, generally speaking, they're unlikely to vote for the far right anyway. People who vote for the far right are, as is generally the case across the board in Europe, white, working class, unemployed, relatively uneducated, dissatisfied, disillusioned voters who are going to look at, people like Mbappe and Thuram and think, well, I'm being lectured to by a millionaire, so this isn't going to change the way that I think. So, I think the hope is that in sort of sounding the alarm, Thuram and Mbappe are going to engage some of these, kind of apathetic, particularly younger voters into thinking, something terrible is about to happen here. I have to engage, I have to mobilize. I guess we will soon find out, whether that has had any kind of impact. But it's a very unusual moment, and it speaks to the urgency of the situation in France. And depending on how the first round of voting goes on Sunday, this will be something that comes up again. And as the further that France go into the tournament, the more this will be brought up, because as Pierre-Etienne said, there is a feeling in France that the country is on the verge of a precipice.
Yeah, it's a subplot to a football tournament, but the magnitude of what we've just discussed is far more important in broader terms. Tom, we really appreciate you coming on, talking about not only the politics but the football as well. And the same to you, Pierre-Etienne. I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you. Now, there are plenty of other podcasts to listen to across the Athletic Network. You can get the Totally Football Show for reaction to all of tomorrow's games at the Euros as the round of 16 kicks off. We've got our daily football briefing show for a bite-sized wrap-up in the morning as well. And we'll be back on Monday for a deep dive into one of the big stories of the day. Thanks very much for listening. Take care.
If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.